Good afternoon. Welcome back. In the U.S., the Congressional Committee, which has been investigating what are called the January 6th riots that saw people using violence to storm the U.S. Capitol building and actually try and kill senior politicians, including Vice President Mike Pence, has now voted to subpoena the former President Donald Trump. The riots happened as Trump called on his supporters to stop the Senate from ratifying the election. He claimed without evidence that the election had been stolen. The claim essentially is that Trump is responsible for some of this violence. Brooks Spector is an associate editor at Daily Maverick. Brooks, good afternoon to you. How important is this? I mean, my memory doesn't go back very far, but I can't remember a former U.S. president being subpoenaed in this way.
Well, I did some research on it, Stephen, and surprising both of us, 5 presidents and former presidents have testified in person, and 2 were subpoenaed. One submitted to the subpoena and showed up and testified, and one submitted a written deposition. Now, admittedly, John Adams was a long time ago, as was John Tyler, but the last one, the most recent president or former president to do that was, not surprisingly, Gerald Ford. So it's not all that long ago, and it's something I should have remembered before I even looked it up. As to the question of what happens next, now the committee, the select committee, is basically winding up its processes and will submit to the whole of the House of Representatives its determination that the former president should be subpoenaed to testify. The whole House would have to vote on it, and it presumably could well be kicked over to the Department of Justice to enforce it under criminal sanction. And as to the question of whether Donald Trump would willingly appear, there are 2 schools of thought on this. One you mentioned before the break, which is unlikely, but the other is somewhere along the way in recent weeks, Donald Trump said he would testify willingly if he could testify live on television and without any cuts. Just best moments of Donald Trump testifying. And one sort of sneaky suspicion on my part is that the ego of Mr. Trump and the narcissism of Mr. Trump is sufficient to collectively that he might find such an opportunity to make all of his statements, all of his claims, all of his false claims, all of his egregiously false claims to the public as a whole. It would be a star turn. He'd have an extraordinary audience. It'd be covered by everybody. And even if his testimony verged on the incoherent, he would still feel that he had gotten his day.
It would probably be a useful way to start a presidential campaign.
Yes. Well, also, or put an end to it, depending on how he came across. Now, let's be real. I mean, he'll by the time the next presidential campaign rolls around, he will be in his late 70s, and he may well be too infirm, or he may well be so tangled up in the proceedings of various other cases. There is, of course, the ongoing question of the illegal holding of top secret sensitive compartmented information documents in a broom closet in Mar-a-Lago. And there is also the ongoing suit in New York State over false statements to the tax people, to the banks, to the insurance companies, to possible investors that the New York State Attorney General, Letitia James, is pursuing at the same time. He may be very busy and not be prepared for this kind of thing. One other factor I just sort of toss out for you. The election, the U.S. midterm election, is November 8th, which is, 3 weeks away or thereabouts? And there are a fair number of people who swore fealty toward Donald Trump running in this election for the Senate seats and House of Representatives seats as Republicans. And it will depend a great deal on how successful they are as to whether the House of Representatives can be persuaded to pursue this further.
Well, I was going to come to the next point. Is there a sort of term limit to this committee? I mean, how much longer does it actually go? Is it going to have the time to try and force Trump or not force Trump to come and testify?
Well, technically, each Congress, each 2-year period, is an entity on itself. In other words, once the term expires, the new Congress comes in, and pending business is no longer pending; it has to be reintroduced. And so, if the Select Committee hasn't formally pushed the subpoena forward, and the House hasn't voted on it by then, presuming the Select Committee is reconstituted, it might be able to move forward with this. But if the Republicans gain control of the House, this one is as dead as the doornail.
Is there any signs that people in the U.S., more people in the U.S., are beginning to demand accountability for what happened? I mean, this, I know, shocked some Americans. It seems not all Americans. You would think, I mean, like we've seen with violence here, there's some people who are shocked by it and want accountability, and some people are not. Are you seeing that people there actually are taking what happened very seriously? I mean, Trump still has strong support. It seems not as strong as maybe he did 3 years ago.
Well, I think the great test is going to come November 8th, when all of those representatives and senatorial candidates when they're up for election or re-election. If a majority of them do well, that's one thing. But if a fair number of them are disappointed by the polls, that's going to say something else. The very early polling just after the Select Committee hearings, before this most recent event the other day, indicated that opinion on Trump hadn't really shifted very much up till that point. But as I say, we have these two events going forward, and I don't think that polling took into account the fact that in that broom closet in the basement of the Mar-a-Lago resort, there were all these top secret documents, which we should also note the Supreme Court did not agree with taking those materials away from the Department of Justice in their review of whether or not there were violations of the law. That was a very quick Supreme Court decision just the other day as well. So we've got 3 weeks to see whether public opinion really has moved the needle, or it becomes a different kind of ballgame, I guess.
There's so many different things that are happening. I mean, if I remember correctly, quite recently, Trump used a racial slur against the wife of Mitch McConnell, who's the leader of the Republicans in the Senate. I mean, a key figure in American politics. McConnell didn't even issue any response. This is his own wife who, you know, Trump used a racial slur against. She's of Taiwanese descent. Does that show that Trump just still has the most amazing hold over the Republican Party? He can say what he wants and get away with it.
To some degree, it does. I mean, we go back to that point that a fair number of the people running for the House and the Senate were close to hand-picked by Donald Trump, including, for example, Herschel Walker, candidate for the Senate from Georgia, also an African-American man, just like the incumbent, Raphael Warnock. And it is pretty clear to most people that Herschel Walker is way out of his depth on this, not the least of which a series of unacknowledged children and claims about business acumen that don't appear to be valid. But so far, he is close to neck and neck with the incumbent, recent incumbent, of course, but the incumbent, Raphael Warnock. I think it specifically to your question of whether he has this hold, he has a hold on people to some degree, but some Republicans, I think, at this point are just holding their head in their hands and saying, maybe he will simply go away. He'll get too old. He'll get tangled up in something else, and maybe we just won't have to deal with him anymore. The one thing that strikes me, though, is going forward to the 2024 presidential election. Oh, dear, we're almost there already, aren't we? There may well be candidates who want to become the Republican candidate for the presidency, people like Governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, who some people refer to as a Trumpian candidate, but without all the problems and oddities of Donald Trump himself. Smarter and more effective in government, but with much less personality and I don't know what you want to call it, excitement or looking into the lip of the caldera or something like that. But there are lots of people of a generation younger than Donald Trump who quite clearly are looking carefully at the possibilities of their being the nominee rather than Donald Trump.
It seems to me, Brooks, we have this quite astonishing thing in many democracies, but the United States, perhaps because it's the oldest sustained democracy, is a symbol of this, of real personal animus, identity politics, Trump. You have fake news, you have just sheer lies entering politics, and right-wing extremism. You see some right-wing extremism and populism in Italy, for example. In Sweden, of all places, a far-right movement, I think, is entering a coalition for the first time. In the UK, you have political chaos. We saw the British Prime Minister, Liz Truss. She's only been Prime Minister for less than a month or so, and people are immediately talking about whether or not she will actually remain. Do you believe that the United States is going to stay in this kind of political situation for a much longer time? Would it end just if Trump disappeared from the political scene? Or do you think that actually things could change and things could become more stable in the near future?
I think the animus across the political spectrum is there, but I think also some of the new techniques and technologies, the social media process really hasn't been fully and completely integrated into the political process. I mean, it's new for a lot of people, and the opportunities of it for good and for the evil are just now being worked out. But the optimist in me wants to say the country has, in its political system, faced even more difficult challenges. The historians would very easily point you in the direction of the Great Depression and World War II as the kind of thing that, if anything, could have torn the country apart fairly easily. 25–30% unemployment for years on end was quite something, and then having to face fascist dictators on both sides of the globe at the same time. If you're further an historian, then you go back to the Civil War itself in the 1860s. I hope, I pray that the country's political and social texture is resilient enough to take on board even the likes of Donald Trump and social media and the current split on the continuum ultimately in its stride. I hope so. Otherwise, we're going to look a great deal like some other countries.
Brooks Spector, thank you very much indeed, Associate Editor at Daily Maverick. I do appreciate the time.